Now let's talk about the types of questions for the reading part of the TOEFL. And the first one is the factual information question. This question will test your ability to locate details that are clearly stated in the passage. So let's check it out in detail here. So as I mentioned, you have to understand specific details and explicit information in the passage. And how will you understand that you are dealing with a factual information question? It will look like a bit like that. According to the passage, or the passage states that which of the following is mentioned in the passage? As you can see here, it's something that is very specific and you can easily find in the passage. Now, let's talk a little bit about the strategies to approach this type of question. The first thing you have to do is read the question carefully. Identify the keywords in the passage so you can look to the text and find it easily there. So you will need to scan the passage, meaning looking for the specific word that you see in the question, right? Read relevant sentences that contain that information and you will translate this to the answers. Finally, choose the correct answer. Now, let's talk about some important tips on how to approach this type of question. I think the most important thing is to learn how to scan. What do I mean by that? You have to use the keywords you find in the question to locate the answer in the text. Paraphrasing. Be prepared to answers that are paraphrasing parts of the text. So they're the exact same thing using different words. And always elimination. Eliminate the options that you think are incorrect. Moving on to the second type of question, which is the negative factual information, which is very similar to the first type, but here we're talking about details that are not in the passage, okay? So let's see this in detail. What are they testing? Your ability to identify information in the passage that is not mentioned there. And what are the keywords that you are looking for? And guys, this is very important and this is one of the main tricks of the TOEFL. When you are doing the TOEFL, you have to pay attention to the question. Sometimes, because of time, the students go directly to the answer, and this question is a very tricky one. Why? Because you go directly to the answers and you have a bunch of correct answers there because they're asking what is not in the text. So pay attention to those keywords. All of the following are mentioned except, that is not in the text, or which of the following is not stated in the passage. All right, this question is the one that the students usually make errors of attention because of nervousness. Okay, moving on. Now let's talk about some of the strategies for this type of question. The first thing is, as I just mentioned, read it carefully. Then eliminate the options, cross out the options that are mentioned. Okay, it's kind of counterintuitive, but if there's something that is mentioned in the passage and isn't an answer, that's the wrong answer, that's the incorrect answer. Then choose the answer that you can't find in any way in the text. Some important tips here are: pay attention to the words, the process of elimination. Eliminate the ones that you are sure that you can see similar words, use synonyms. Here they are not gonna state exactly as it is in the text. So use a paraphrasing as well and use synonyms. If you see synonyms, if you see answers that are very similar to the ones in the text, you're gonna eliminate. And finally, always double check. And the third type of question is the inference question. This question will ask you to understand what the text is about, what is implied in the text. So for this type of question, I recommend you following my tip of pretending you are a student of that subject so you understand what the text is about. So let's check out how does it look like. This will test your ability to draw logical conclusions based on the information of the reading. So the questions will look a bit like that. The passage implies that, it can be inferred from the passage, or the author suggests. So as you can see here, you have to read and understand what is being said in the passage. How do you deal with this type of question? What is the strategy for it? So the first thing is understanding. You have to read the passage carefully and pay attention to the overall meaning and the relationship between ideas in the passage. Then you have to look for clues. There are some words that will make you remember the question, and the answer is probably there. So try to understand what is implied in those words. Consider context. What do I mean by that? Based on the topic, what is the author trying to bring? What is the author suggesting there? And finally, select the correct answer. Some important tips are: read it carefully. Okay, remember, when you notice an inference question, you know that you have to have an understanding of that part of the passage, of that paragraph. So reading it carefully is key. Also, consider the author's tone. What do you think the author wants to convey in that part of the text? And finally, and most importantly, don't overthink. Don't over infer. Okay, this is a mistake that lots of students make. They overthink and they infer things that are not in the passage. The answer is in the passage, okay? So pay attention to this. Now let's move on to the fourth type of question, which is the vocabulary question. And if you are a speaker from a language that comes from Latin, I have good news for you here. Because some of the words, they have a root in the Latin language. So for example, if you speak Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, or French, this might be easier for you because you can literally translate the word. Sometimes the word doesn't come from Latin, so then you have to understand by context. Relax if you don't speak a language that comes from Latin, because there are lots of ways to approach the vocabulary question. So let's dig in. In this question, they are testing your understanding of academic vocabulary in context. So it's about academic vocabulary, that it's a more formal vocabulary. That's what I'm saying, that it sometimes comes from Latin, okay? How the questions are framed. Usually it says, the word X in the passage is closest in meaning to, and then you have to find a synonym, okay, something that has the same meaning. A tip here is to try to use the words of the options in the text. In the passage, the word why would be best replaced by, so as I mentioned, try to replace it in the question, in the word in the option in the text. So let's dig in on the strategies on how to approach this type of question. Read the sentence. Pay attention to the context in which the word is being used. Context is key. It has to make sense in context. Then consider synonyms and antonyms. Sometimes the options are the opposite of what that word actually means. Then eliminate options that you clearly see that makes no sense. Usually what happens here is that the students are always in between two options there. So already eliminate the other two, because it will increase your chances of getting the correct answer. You have 50% of chances in the case that you need to guess here, all right? And then choose the answer. Now let's talk about some of the important tips on how to approach this type of question. The first thing is understand context. You have to understand what the sentence, this one is very detailed because you have a sentence, you have the word in sentence. So you have to understand what that sentence means in the context of the passage. Also, pay attention to the word's family. Is it a noun? Is it a verb? Is it a preposition? Preposition, not very likely. Nouns and verbs or adjectives are more likely to be there. So you have to find a word that is also in the same family. So if they are asking for a noun, the correct option is gonna be a noun. If they are asking for an adjective, the correct answer is gonna be an adjective. And finally, eliminate the 5th type of question is the rhetorical purpose question. This one is very specific, and I think this one sometimes a little bit challenging because you have to understand what the author wants to convey, what the author wants to show you in the text. So let's see how it works. What is being tested? Your understanding of the inclusion of a certain information by the author in the passage using a specific language. How will this be tested? What is the question showing there for you? The author mentions in order to provide an example, in order to connect two ideas. Usually that's the kind of correct option you will have there. Or the author purpose in discussing is to okay? And what is the strategy to go about this kind of question that is sometimes a little bit more challenging? Because you have to understand why that sentence or why that wording is in that part of the text. So you have to read the passage carefully and understand the author's intention. Then you have to consider the context in which that sentence is. Is it bringing something new, like adding information? Those kind of verbs are very important, like adding, exemplifying, connecting. And finally, eliminate the options that you clearly see that make zero sense, So for example, it's not bringing anything new, it's not bringing an example. So you know that the option that says presents an example is incorrect. Now, some important tips on how to deal with rhetorical purpose questions. So the first thing you have to have in mind is to analyze the author's intention. Okay, why did the author include any specific detail in that specific part of the passage? Then consider the overall argument. How does this information supports the rest of the arguments in the text? And finally, look for signal words such as to illustrate, to support, to contrast. Those keywords are gonna help you out in this part of the reading part of the TOEFL. Moving on to the 6th type of question that you will find in the TOEFL is a sentence simplification question. Guys, I know lots of students hate this kind of question, but to be honest, it's my favorite type of question, and I will tell you a little bit why here. So what is this testing? It is testing your ability to simplify and paraphrase sentences in the text. So basically, you will have a sentence, they will highlight a sentence in the text, and they will ask you to choose an option that expresses the same thing from that sentence. So let's check it out in detail here. What is testing? Your ability to identify main idea of a complex sentence and express it in a simpler way. Just like artificial intelligence, for example. Some keywords for this question, they will always ask like this. Which of the sentences below best expresses the essential information in the following sentence, and then they will copy the sentence. It will be in bold for you there. Okay, let's talk now about some of the strategies on how to approach this type of question. Deconstruct the highlighted sentence. The highlight sentence is usually kind of long, like 3 lines. So pay attention to bits by bits and try to find an answer that talks about each of those parts, because sometimes you have an answer that only talks about 2 parts of that sentence. Then compare all the options with the one in the text. For this question, it might take a little bit longer because you actually have to read all the options and see if they make sense in the text. Finally, choose the answer. Now let's talk about some of the important tips on how to deal with it. Focus on the main idea, okay? Don't overthink here. What is the main idea that that sentence wants to convey? That's what you need to be focusing on. Then ignore non-essential information from the sentence. Remember, you are simply simplifying it. Some of the options will have those details that are completely unnecessary. And then what you should do here? Eliminate the options that are not bringing the most important thing, the main idea. Look for answer choices that are concise and clear. Sentence simplification. You have to be concise, you have to be simple. And finally, compare each of the options carefully. Don't rush in this type of question. Now let's move on to the sentence insertion question. This question will test your ability to insert a whole sentence in the passage, something that was not there before. So let's check it in detail, and I will show you an example in the next part. So they will be asking your ability to understanding the organization and flow of ideas in a passage, because you will need to insert something that will make sense in that part of the test. Some of the strategies here are: read the sentence, read it always the beginning and the ending of the sentences. And the sentences have to be connected. Identify the topic has to be connected, it has to be coherent, and it has to follow logic, okay? And then you choose what fits best logically and move on. Some tips here. Read the sentence carefully. Consider the flow, okay? Where does the sentence fit logically in the paragraph? And this one, guys, it's very interesting. Check for pronouns of reference, okay? So in the sentence, you might have pronouns that refer to something that comes before. And then in the previous sentence, you will see that noun that is referred by the pronoun. So this is a very nice tip to see these referrals in this part of the test. Let's check an example here just so you understand how to go about it. This would be an example of a sentence here. We're not gonna do it, it's just for you to understand how it's gonna look when you are taking the test. So you have here the sentence you have to insert in the text, and here we have the text, right? What you will be doing when you are doing it differently from the others that are all multiple choice. Here you will be dragging the sentence, so you'll be putting it in one of those squares. Okay, when we go to the practice, you will see this in action. And the last and most important question is this one. Okay, so pay extra attention to the summary questions. The summary questions are very important because they are worth 2 points. And it will take longer. For this type of question, you have to have an understanding of the whole text. You have to have an overall understanding of the text. So let's dig in and learn a little bit more about this one. What is gonna be tested here? They will test your ability to understand main ideas and supporting details of the passage as a whole. The strategy here is to read the passage carefully and understanding everything that is there. Then you have to review the options accurately and understanding which ones are important and which ones are just details to the passage. Don't you worry, we will see an example and I will explain in detail how it works. Then you have to eliminate the options that are incorrect or that are minor details and choose the correct answer. Important tips on how to go about the summary questions. First thing is identify main ideas. Identify what the passage is about. What is the main idea of the first paragraph? What is the main idea of the second paragraph? And so on until the conclusion. Guys, don't ignore the conclusion. If you ignore the conclusion, you might get an option wrong here. Okay? Avoid overly specific options. As I told you, this is about main idea. And finally, always compare the options and double check in the passage, okay? Check the passage. Don't ignore the passage and go to this question. You have to pay attention to what is in the passage. So I'll show you an example to you here and we will read in detail the question and you understand how to go about it. Let's go. Here we have the directions, so let's read together and then I'll show you how the answers will appear. Directions. An introductory sentence for a brief summary of the passage is provided below. This is the sentence. You always have a sentence that will introduce the summary here. Complete the summary by selecting the 3 answer choices that express the most important ideas in the passage. Now, guys, pay attention here. I use blue to show you something. Some sentences do not belong in the summary because they express ideas that are not presented in the passage. So easy. They are wrong ideas. And or are minor ideas. Here's the trick. Okay? Because those options here, they are in the text. However, they are minor ideas, so they are incorrect here. Drag the answer choices, so the answers will appear for you like this. You have always 6, and you always have to identify 3. We are not doing here, this is just for an example, and then you will drag those options here and bring those options to this space here, for example. Okay? And it will look a bit like that. The choices, So you drag to the correct place. In the practice, you'll be able to see this in detail.